Canada's participation in the Second World War took a giant stride forward in the summer of 1940 with the fall of France. British forces pinned on the beaches of Dunkirk did make an heroic stand. Indeed, they managed to rescue more than 200,000 soldiers from certain capture. But they left behind much of their heavy equipment, thousands of trucks, tanks, and cannon. With German invasion imminent, England had only 5,000 vehicles for its army. Most of these were motorcycles. Throughout the Commonwealth, only Canada had the capacity to build military vehicles on a scale needed to ensure victory. This is the story of how Canada came of age industrially. Before the war was through, Canada produced more than 800,000 military vehicles for its allies. You are about to hear an account of how this came to be, from the men who put Canada on the map industrially. The Canadian Military Historical Society held a two-day seminar in Rockwood, Ontario in July of 1984. It attracted military collectors and enthusiasts from around the world. They came to hear the Canadian story.
We're here to talk about huts, about foxes, about grizzlies, lynxes, and to see what their impact was on alligators and ducks. It's not history according to the little green book that many of you remember. But seriously, I think the best way to summarize it all, for what I have to say, is to relate to you a situation that happened in my house about 3 weeks ago, when a repairman came to fix the phone. He was a young fellow of about early 20s. While he's fixing the phone, he said, "What's that thing out in the driveway?" And I said, "That's a Second World War Canadian Army Ford." He looked at me. Second World War. What year was that? I hope he was relating to the truck. But I too was shocked. Because we have done things, or you have done things, Canada has done things over the years. And what we see around us is part of our history, it's part of our culture. I'm the younger generation who wasn't around when all this happened. With one slight correction, Sid Swallow started on Ford CMPs in the spring of 1937. I came off the production line in 1937.
The two main points we wish to discuss in the next 2 days are Canada coming of age, if I can use cliches to do it, Canada coming of age industrially during the Second World War, and coming of age militarily, which we will be discussing aspects of tomorrow. Now, it's too bad we had to come of age industrially during the war, but that's how things happened. But we did rise to the occasion. Through some favorable circumstances, that we had the resources, we weren't being bombed and so on. But for 11 million people, we did some rather astounding things from a standing start. 900,000 military vehicles produced in 4 years. Maybe 10,000 less, but getting very close to 900,000 military vehicles, mostly of Canadian design. We have some examples here. Of those, 45,000 were armored vehicles. And of course, the Canadian military patterned vehicle, those distinctive snub-nosed vehicles that we'll have a couple of people from other countries making comment on after lunch. You've heard of Long Branch Industries, one of the 26 Crown corporations formed in Long Branch, this side of Toronto. They produced, maybe it's not very much, but they did produce the finest quality of number 4 Mark I Enfield rifles, known to be high quality, and they produced 910,000 of them. We produced 400,000 other automatic weapons. Our capacity in September 1939 to produce .303 ammunition in Canada was 700,000 rounds per month. By 1941 and for the rest of the war, the monthly production of .303 ammunition in Canada was 90 million per month. And that was .303 ammunition alone, a legion of other calibers. To give an example of the amount of ammunition that was produced in Canada, these ubiquitous steel boxes that everybody has in their garage. The reason everyone has one in their garage is that we produced in excess of 20 million of those boxes in Canada to take the ammunition that we sent overseas. Maybe that gives us a little basis for a start. I could go on these things. I think we will stop for now, and I think most of you have been introduced through mail to our panel. But we're just going to go down the line and give you another chance, or for the few that may not know, just briefly the involvement of these people. And if they don't start contradicting each other immediately, we may get questions before lunch. We're going to break for lunch around noon and come back and have a question period for a time. We'll see how long. Well, no more than an hour and a half after lunch. We intend after that to just visit for a while. A chance for you people to actually ask personal questions of the panel, to tour whatever vehicles are here. Incidentally, I would like to add to Jim Wood's comment that the four-wheel drive auto company truck that inspired Mr. Harrington in the first place, we're fortunate enough to have one. We'll be driving that probably later today. Rather an interesting vehicle. Could we start, Doug, with you, Colonel Doug James? Doug, if you just sort of outline where you were and what you did, and so that we'll give a little guide for questioning later.
I'll only go back to September the 3rd, 1939. Happened to be that was a Friday that the war was declared. I was working for General Motors in New York. I got the train that night, came back to Canada, and spent Saturday deciding whether I was going to join the Army to protect Niagara Falls or really get into it. So I joined the Army on the 5th of September. 1939. And Easter Sunday, 1940, I moved to Ottawa under the aegis of Colonel Carr. And from that point until December 1945, I was more or less anchored in Ottawa, and gradually went up from TSO 3, TSO 2, TSO 1, and became Director of Mechanization. Watching things develop all across the world, actually, because during the course of the war, I traveled to practically all the theaters of war and saw what the troops wanted. Frank and I worked together. He was my senior officer for quite a while early in the war until he moved over to munitions and supply. But I had a great time during the war. I ran a directorate that was known for its ability and its arrogance. I instructed my people that they were to take no bullshit from anybody, and that I would defend them under any circumstances. I had a most astonishing directorate. 3 of them have gone on to become millionaires. One of the best officers I had, I got from San Quentin Penitentiary. He was a well-known forger. He had beautiful handwriting and was the Americans decided to let him out if he'd come up and join the Army. And then he was over 50 at the time, and he went through Brockville and went through everything and became an officer and ended the war as a major. Well, in the beginning of the war, the duties, it was the Director of Mechanization and Artillery under Colonel Carr. About June, and you can correct me, Frank, if I'm wrong, about June 1941, the design function was moved to munitions and supply. So the Director of Mechanization became responsible for the supply position in figuring out exactly what the troops wanted and then making sure that they got it.
I joined the Army in 1933. Things were pretty tough in those days. And I went overseas in September 33 on course at the Then at the end of the first year, I was attached to the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich. The main purpose of that move was to have somebody that knew, at least had been exposed to the manufacture of guns. French company at the time were interested in Sorel. However, when I came back from overseas, things were getting pretty interesting, and I forgot all about my attachment to the arsenal, and I was on vehicles which I stayed for practically the whole war. We had about a dozen, I think, old 18-pounders with the high guide ribs, and they do droop after so many rounds. So it was my job to straighten them. Actually, I found a firm up in Welland that built the jigs, and we straightened all that were crooked. It was quite a job. But as soon as I came back from overseas, and apart from this little job of straightening a few guns, I was put on vehicles. I knew the motor companies pretty well by the end of my sojourn with M&S. After forming R.C.E.M.E was quite a hot subject at the time, breaking away from ordnance.
Well, I think you made Colonel Hanson's day. That was a pretty good line, wasn't it? I formed R.C.E.M.E. You like that one? There it is, 20 years. Colonel Franklin, I think you've given a pretty good breadth of time for reference for questions later on. Thank you very much. I don't know whether they've all read the Blueprint for Victory, Colonel. I don't think they have. Even if they had, I don't know where to start, so you better tell a fair amount of the whole thing. I wouldn't know how to do it. Colonel Stockleback, well, he'll tell you himself.
Where do you start?
I don't know. Ford Motor Company, I guess, living next door to Wallace's. Start right there.
In 1941, I remember I was in Fort Windsor, and we got a telex from Ottawa asking for a technical representative to go to the Middle East, and just before lunchtime. And by lunchtime, I decided I'd go. I didn't know where I could fit in with the war effort, and this sounded like a pretty good idea. And I was exposed to a concentrated effort on learning about military vehicles. Then they shoved me in a B-24, and I went off to England. And Stanhouse looked after me and said, looked after me over there.
About a month after anybody in this
And I gradually learned to the different ranks, what the insignia meant. And that's pretty, I was green, I didn't know nothing. And you got all your documents in England, the ration book and so on. And after about 6 weeks of that, I let it be known that I thought I should get on with it. And a suggestion was made that I should go in a submarine to Cairo, to Alexandria. I said, well, if I have to go that way, I will, but I'd rather fly. But we got to El Fasher in Sudan. And you've never seen such big things flying around. They were like little zeppelins. And we were told that if you squashed one on your neck, you'd raise a boil. So you avoided that. But you slept on the mosquito nets, that wasn't bad. And so we got to Khartoum, and then the flying boat again left the Nile to Cairo. And we were put up at Shepherd's Hotel. It's a very pleasant place. And it cost us, the military rates, a little under $5 a day. A beautiful big room. Food was good. And after a couple of days of sitting around wondering what to do, I'd been given the name of the brigadier in ordnance. And I went to see him, and he wasn't particularly interested. And come back and see me in a few days, so I came back a few days later. And this went on for 2 weeks. Every couple of days or three, I'd go down to see the brigadier. And I got a little fed up then, and I allowed it. I had a perfectly good job back in Canada, and if he didn't want me here, there's nothing for me to do. Well, put me on an airplane, send me back home again. So he said, well, Stockton, why are you here? So I explained about the signal. By this time I was picking up the Army stuff, you don't call it telegram, signal. That went from GHQ Middle East to a War Office and repeated to Ottawa for a technical representative from both General Motors and from Canada, from Ford in Canada. And I said, I'm the guy from Ford. He said, you know, Slaughterpike, I think I sent that thing. So in comes the staff sergeant, and he asks for file so-and-so, and the sergeant comes back with a big thing of the red tape in the corner. And turned it up, and sure enough, he'd sent it. So in retrospect, and after you sort of got organized out there, obviously they're making a final security check on me. And this was pretty bright boy, this brigadier. And so they fitted me out with a nice office and car and chauffeur, and then we started operating. We got some of these South African chaps in with us who had come up with the South African 1st Division. I had worked in the Ford Motor Company in South Africa for nearly 4 years, 3.5 years, 1933 to 1936, when I came back to Canada. So by 1941, with an odd name like Stockholm, they heard that I was in Middle East, and these chaps started turning up in my office who were in South African Army. One of them had been my service clerk in South Africa. One of them had been the assembly stockkeeper. And the assembly stockkeeper had been loaned by Ford South Africa to the Army. He was in an Army uniform, but he still paid by Ford South Africa. And we gradually put together a little unit, and the chap I reported to, General Richards, he was DOS. He was a very able man, and he could see the advantages of putting a unit together that specialized on military vehicles. So we put together a group, mostly South African, of about 32 chaps. And we call it Special MT and Stores Advisory Staff. The result of that was that we could put these chaps out in a location, and they couldn't be posted unless I did it. So if we had a parts problem, which we had talent there that knew how to organize it. We got the parts under control, and eventually we got the assembly. Let me interject something else. As a civilian, in a 100% military atmosphere with a war going on, I felt my neck. I felt, I should be very discreet, very careful. Cairo was a place where we were told there were a lot of spies and people and stuff. But the military got used to me after a while, and they became a little confident. One of the early questions I was asked, what's the BMEP on the Ford engine? Fortunately, I knew. Brake mean effective pressure, a little over 100 pounds at that time. And the chap who asked me, Colonel, this apparently gave him great confidence that those stoppers like me wouldn't be. Anyway, they had nice chaps trying to assemble vehicles, but they were fellows who had been running, one group had been running the maintenance for the South African Railroad, on the trucks and buses and things of that nature. And those of you who have had assembly experience, you assemble a vehicle and get to the end of the assembly line, it won't run, you've got a problem. Well, they had problems running out of their ears. These things wouldn't run when they came to the assembly line. It was so bad they got another Bellman hanger stuck on the end of the Bellman hanger that was the assembly line to make these things run. And they fell back, and they still wouldn't run, and stuff and so on. So we got an English group in, Blanco White, the colonel in charge, and he tried awfully hard. But the big thing we did was it seems so obvious when you think of it later. You assemble the truck frame upside down. You put the springs and the axles in, and then you turn it over and put the rest of the gubbins on it. They weren't doing that. We took the engine and dressed it up. We put the distributor and the carburetor and the fuel pump through a little hutch where we had some electric lights to heat it up. Some of this stuff had been in cases for a long time, and it had picked up moisture and so on. So we heated them up, assembled it to the engine. We started the engine without any water. All we wanted to know was if the thing would run. And if it wouldn't run, let's fix it there before we get to the end of the assembly line. Those two things sort of really pulled the plug on this. And we were doing 6 to 7 jobs an hour, 10 hours a day on that one line. The motive power was a 10 horsepower motor through a CMP transmission and a Morris gun tractor rear end. We got production, and we wrote off every month a few vehicles, so that at the end of the supply mech we didn't have a great big write-off. We could build more vehicles than what that made everybody a hero. We built this assembly plant was about 14 miles south of Suez, a place called Attica. In between Attica and Suez itself were a couple of native villages. They were not always on our side. We had a 4-inch pipeline coming down from Suez to bring water in, and every now and then they'd go shut and pick through it. Well, that helped. Then they'd steal the copper wire off the telephone poles. That helped. So anyway, we're talking about this thing at Suez. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, and we had what they called Indian sheds. I didn't know what they were before. But there we assembled the Scamos and the Bowdens, the Diamond T's, the Whites and the Macs, and all the miscellaneous stuff that came out. And the Jeeps were our standby. They came out, as you probably all know. Each Jeep in its own little box. All you do is lay it open, fill it with gas, and put some air in the tires, and Bob's your uncle. So if production was down a little bit, we'd open some Jeep cases and bring it up, so we had a nice level production week in and week out. It was just beautiful. Then to get the vehicles up to the Central Park, which was a Tel Aviv. Those of you who are good on your ancient British history, there was a great big battle fought there in 1890, I think. Remember? Anyway, it was the biggest ordnance depot at that time anywhere in the world, I'm told. We took the vehicles up there. Incidentally, we ran a test on a couple of them to see if the stuff we were putting in the axles to keep them from rusting was a good lubricant. So we deliberately ran a couple of vehicles. It was about 50 miles without any lubricant in the axles from Attica to Altamira. And the stuff stood up all right. You know, you got to find out if the thing's idiot-proof. So at Tel Altamira, before they went into vehicle park, we de-kitted them, took everything movable out of the vehicle. And then the vehicle went to park. So that when the vehicle was issued, the unit that was drawing it got the equipment that they needed in that vehicle, and the tools weren't stolen and that sort of stuff. At Tel Altamira, we also had our engine rebuilding plant, which was conventional. We had 2 4-spindle diamond bores and for the blocks. We had Barnes drills for doing the conrods, the hole. With the Excellos, we could bore within 1 thou less if the guy was really good. So there was very little honing, just, you know, a quick job. So that gave us production. We had 6 Landis crank grinders and 2 Churchills. So we had lots of production facilities, lots of engines to do. And with that experience and the experience at Attica on assembly, we got Canada to stop sending the automatic supply of parts. We put it on a demand basis. Because we were piling up stuff that we never used coming out on these, what did you call it, the supply mech standard? I've forgotten that. Anyway, that sort of roughly covers it. Quickly.
Not for me, it doesn't.
Well, we did another thing that was interesting. It started off sort of quietly, rebuilding trucks. And we took a Bellman hangar, which were sort of reasonably available. And we brought the truck in at one corner of the building and started to strip it. By the time the chassis got at the bottom, it was just a bare chassis frame, no springs, no axles, nothing. And we could straighten the frame and weld it and fix it up across the bottom of the building, and then rebuild it coming up the other side. The steering gear, all the stuff we were going to use over again, except engines, the engines were rebuilt in the engine plant. The axles were rebuilt in the axle plant. But things like steering gears and all the miscellaneous little stuff were built flowing across the plant, screwed together in the truck on that way. That worked extremely well. We got production. We got a good job at the end with very few rejects, if any. And eventually the A-vehicle folks got sort of interested, and we did it for the tanks. We ran a plant in Basra, the asshole of the world. Up at the end of the Persian Gulf, where they're now having some difficulty. If you put a wrench down in the sand outside, you couldn't pick it up. It was so hot. But they were screwing civilian vehicles together there for the Russians. That was interesting. But it was civilian Ford trucks out of the U.S., 6-cylinders. Chevy civilian trucks, Studebaker trucks, that was sort of enough of it. The Russians would come down and drive them up north. Their women drivers were big, their copy of the American Colt 45. They were a rough bunch. But it was an interesting operation. We had a lot of trouble there with odd bits of stuff and on top of the cylinders, top of the pistons. And you normally get a little bit of stuff from around where you mount the carburetor. You'll get a washer or nut, the small stuff will fall in. If it's small enough, it gets embedded in the piston. You don't get any kind of stuff. But these were bigger items. These were not from around the top of the engine. And on one of my trips back, I brought samples with me. And FBI in Detroit got themselves involved, and they solved it. There was a German-American bund in New Jersey. These vehicles were all sent from Detroit and South Bend and so on to New Jersey to be crated for export. They were semi-stripped and crated. And the German-American bund was dumping the stuff in. So anyway, we didn't mix it before that. We cranked them over before we put them in the chassis. And it didn't turn nicely. We took the head off. But it was silver in that place.
Do you want to do that off the hook now?
Thank you.
Terrible misnomer, because as a matter of fact, I was a 25-year-old stripling that happened to be around Ford Motor Company, Ford Motor Company Canada, which did not have an engineering department, but we were forced to do a little engine, and so what engineering was done in the service department, which I had joined in 1935. And I have to agree with Frank that 1933 was one hell of a year to graduate. I hear that kids that have been graduating in 1980 and 81 complaining about the hard times, but I usually keep quiet about it because, what's that old part know about it? So to speak. But all I could find to do was a job in a superset gasoline station, $13 a week. Happened, however, that I was a fan of pressure products at that particular time. And I finally found an opportunity to get a job in winter working for a paper box company through some influence of my dad. Because I understood that if you want to get a job with a company, well, you do two things. One is to be employed already, and the other thing is to be right with that company. Those, I think, are the two major points here we thought we were at that time. And so I went to a paper box company, and my father, who was driver for a steel company, came along and said that they're probably looking for people who have some experience in service stations, as we're thinking of setting up sub-dealers all over the country to act as I think what we used to call watchdogs, bird dogs for business. To please my old dad, I went down the court and flight and I got it in my hair right then and there. It was 42 years later before I was able to leave the building. So to speak. Anyway, those things kept showing up, like some company wanted to, we had a lot of overseas business, about 60% of our business then was export shipment. People overseas kept wanting a certain kind of wheel. So, there being no engineering department, it fell upon the service department. I found myself doing things of this kind. And so, it was then along about that time that negotiations began to be carried on, as I think Bill mentioned in his book. That began to be talks between the British War Office in Canada and the Canadian Department of National Defence and companies, etc. And it was decided somewhere along about there that a couple of, I think there were 1,500 weights we had to build up the first time. So there being once again no engineering department, and Stan Ellis was our boss at that time. And these two fellows, well, you better get busy and set up a little workshop down below, and we'll get some specifications for you, and go ahead and build one, or two, or three, and not pay sure weight of the original 1,500 weights, one of which has been found somewhere, I think. It was a little later. And we took them out to Camp Gordon, and we did the testing, and they said that's not too bad, but there's some new specifications coming along. And that was the sort of the daily change memo that time. I think along about that time too, there was an idea of some sand tires, so we fitted up a 1,500 weight, what we call it, Afton pickup, with special sand tires that theoretically have the same per square inch pressure on the sand as did the foot of the camel. And these tires came from England, and General
of roaring to the sound up and down the road. Some of these things worked all right. I think the next thing they wanted was the CMP, and I guess we're getting on for 1938 at that time. No, it was quite a test job went on. It was not a test job, but a demonstration went on this time instead of Wawa. And G.M., both of us had received the CMP bogey. All we had to do was fit it up to a vehicle with a certain specs, and that's where those two original gun factories came from. And it was a question of a group of people getting together, like group of people. I mean, you gathered as many technicians and engineer fellows as you could, and we scrounged for this and scrounged for that, and dealt here and this dealt there, and such until we got vehicles flung together. And I'm just trying to explain that this was the kind of engineering that went into these first jobs. And they did get put together and they did run. And somewhere along about that same time, the Armored Fighting Vehicle School at Borden, who were using some little Carolinoid tractors, which I think was the only armored vehicles in the country at that time. And they had I think it was an Austin air-cooled engine, in which somebody's engine, which was an air-cooled one, which had practically beaten themselves to death, I guess. And at the time we were talking to them, they had apparently got to a stage where they were using about equal quantities of oil and gasoline. So we got the job then of putting a little 60 horsepower V8 for it. And I must say that I at least personally supervised that job and had quite a bit of fun driving around Windsor, and every once in a while I was steering in one side and I had to go making all right turns until I get back home somehow with the right turn. And I climbed the Ford coal piles quite regularly. And then finally we got down to something which eventually came into production. And we had to put together some pilot models. And Bill mentioned two fellows I had working for me, where one was a tinsmith and the other was a millwright. These were the sort of people that one employed to put these vehicles together. But it was 1939 at this time, and one of these fellows was a Finn and the other was a Russian. And the Russians were invading Finland. That's how the same people these fellows were. And I would argue about the merits of the two countries most of the time, but they were both very good men, and we managed to get them done. And we were working very closely, of course, at that time with G.M., and we were to do the body parts, and they did most of the chassis parts. If I remember correctly, we married things together, and I think Bill mentioned in his book, I mentioned to him or to Rolly at one time that we saw, I'm sure I saw as much of Ed Armstrong down Motors as I did with my boss before. And it was getting to the point where we had to put something in production, so we eventually got the Mark I into production, which the first of these were done, I think, in April, or probably May 1940. And I was asked to go overseas at that time anyway. As Bill has also mentioned in the book, I got married on the 23rd of May, and I think we sailed on the 2nd of June or something. And part of the little story is that I had to interrupt my honeymoon to fix one of these gun tractors that wasn't going to make it fly. That, I think, was typical of wartime activity. And then I went overseas to work with Panelists, and I became deputy director of what became known was, finally became known as D.M.S. And so I wasn't further connected with the basic design of the vehicle. I'm still blaming for the fact that we came up with the vehicle that had something like 12 inches of space to put two large boots in. And in England, people used to bring that up with me quite often, and if it was a big man, I'd tell them we didn't know who that was, and if it was a little man, I'd say, I didn't want to make something out of it. And I suppose I should mention the fact that the reason we had that thing was that there had been a guy, FAT, sent out to Canada the James organization at that time, that because of Army decisions that we would have to follow the British, as we were likely to be a part of the British Army and on interchangeability to the greatest extent possible. So the killer on that thing was the insistence that the distance from the fascia board, as they like to call it, to the center line of the front axle was to be 13 inches. No more, no less. That was the measurement of the gas traffic. And of course, in the case of Ford, at any rate, with a V8 engine to put the cab over engine and room at the side of V8 of the V8 engine for room for people's feet was a matter of some difficulty, because there was an overall width of the vehicle specified as well. That's how it came, how that one came about. And of course, if I remember correctly, it was hardly in production correctness. It was hardly in production before they started working on what became the second pattern of the cab. But we didn't get into it for over a year, I think, did we?
Oh, it wasn't quite that long. Fred Hudson was the guy that worked basically on it.
And so that was really all I had to do with the basic design of the vehicle. And if my memory were as good as that of Doug James and Kuma Southback, I'm sure I'd be able to fit it a bit more than I can. But I think that's all I have to say. That was my part in it.
Bill, do you want to do your part?
Yes, I can comment on that because in 1940 I joined the Ford Motor Company in Toronto in the Danforth plant where there's now Shoppers World. In 1960 I joined in the motor and I worked there for 23 years on both sides of the fence. And just about 1 month ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, at the Holiday Inn near Cambridge, I put on a stool as a General Motors man for some Ford salesmen to teach them about medium-duty trucks. So there is an interchange of, and quite a relationship between General Motors and Ford. In my own case, of course, I know so many people at Ford have been there 20 years, and so many people at General Motors have been there 23 years. So it's been, for me anyway, I have found that Ford and General Motors are a great team. If they are working together to do anything, so help me, they'll move this mountain on earth. They are powerful and they're good and they got fine people. Both of this, well, they do work together. And of course, during the war, they had to work together because it was a common denominator. That way that there was a war on and they could make certain things that Ford could make other things. So it worked out really well. Anyway, I got to be very careful what I say here today. Because when I left, they moved me from the Danforth plant to Windsor in 1941, and I had as a boss Kuhn Stoffelbach. So in October 41, they moved me over to England, and I had Sid as a boss and Herb as a boss. So if I lie just a little bit to tell them that I really worked hard over there, you'll understand. But it was a great relationship, and Monday I had two major things over there. One was getting special bodies, the design from the ministry and the requirement from the Army, and then finding the source to build them and then having them built. As an example, we built our command vehicles, which had the plastic roof and the map board and the 19 Sept. We had to have, for plasma, we had a special vehicle for hauling plasma. Pontoons for the British, we had to build those especially over there. They were two English design, but they were built by English firms, but on our vehicles, on our Canadian vehicles, and the 64. Then we also had, as sort of a recreational vehicle for the generals. So we had a pink bathtub in one and a yellow bathtub in the other. I had an interest in young building vehicles for a Purdue 20mm hydraulically operated turret. It had to have the ammunition in pockets in the floor, all sealed for waterproofing. And it had to be strong enough, of course, to take a horizontal thrust from these 4 guns at one time. They were used for shooting down the B-1s, if you recall, down around Dover, that area. And we had lots of fun. But we always used to say about the barrage balloons that were all down there, that if they ever cut the rope from those, they didn't sink. I don't know anybody from England here. But anyway, those are the kind of things we built over there. It was interesting because some places, they actually, during peacetime, would take a wealthy person would buy a Rolls-Royce vehicle. They would not buy the body on it, a Rolls-Royce with the hood and with the wheels and the chassis. They would take it to this place, and these people, various people, would design a body for that Rolls-Royce chassis. They would build you a special seat because you would fall from the hip up. They had wicker on the door and all those kinds of things. So what I'm getting at is the people that were building these vehicles for us were experts. They just did beautiful workmanship. We did a lot of vehicles for, I call it the heavyweight vehicle, made them into office vehicles. That was General Queer. He was the one that I had to show him that. And we had 3 lads in the field calling them when I was there, R.C.E.M.E workshop. And they found out what the problems were with the vehicles. They found out how to fix that problem. In most cases, the Army knew how to do it, but we helped. And they would report that back to me and her, and we would get that information as quickly as possible, as accurately as possible, and with diagrams and pictures and anything possible, back to Ottawa, who in turn would get it to the manufacturer. On the other side of the place, we would take that information we learned in the field, we would make a bulletin out of it, again with drawings and pictures, and turn it over to the R.C.E.M.E people, under Roy Buckle, and he would send it out to the field, say, here is the way to fix things. As a very good example, we're very scientific, and yet we're scientific. We had an awful lot of problems with the rotor on distributors burning through from the top shaft of the distributor up through to the spring. They were shorting out, of course, the vehicle wouldn't run. It wasn't too long after that the D.M.S, when we were very worried about them coming off landing craft and stuff and having the distributor burn through, the rotor burn through. Well, actually there was such a bad that we ran right out of the rotor in England. There was none of the parts of what to do. Vehicles tied up for a damn little rotor with a hole in the top. Well, one of the lads, we were waterproofing vehicles at that time, if you recall, and one of the lads took some waterproofing material, rolled it up into a little ball of a 1/4-inch diameter, stuck it in the top of the rotor, started the engine the way it went. And that was the fix. We sent that fix out to do all rotors, whether they were burnt or not, to do all rotors with a blob of what a waterproofing material.
Bostic.
Bostic?
Bostic.
Dum-dum. Anyway, it wasn't scientific, but it got us through until rotors came. What we had found out was the rotor manufacturer had changed manufacturer and the little zitter. And we actually drilled a hole right through and put this on and would stop the spark from going from the shaft up through the rotor to the little spring that contacts the cap. So that wasn't scientific, but down it kept things running. So that's the kind of thing we did. Mainly was to find out the problems that were encountered in the field, get that information to Canada, get that information to R.C.E.M.E, who could get it back into the field on the fixes. That's most important, really, in any kind of operation. We do it today, is getting information back to the man who's designing it and who is actually fixing it or paying for it. So it's an important part, but getting the information out, communication is extremely important. So those are the kind of things that we were involved in, and I thank you very much. Thank you.
One of the comments that Bill made in introducing this seminar was a rather remarkable story of putting civilian peacetime car manufacturers to work together and get 900,000 vehicles built in such a short period of time. I think I can probably give you 2 or 3 examples of this sort of thing. I was first mixed up with the Canadian military pattern vehicles toward the end of 1939 or early 1940. I had been working for Ford on a training program involving overseas assembly plants, and I was working on this training course at our Toronto assembly plant, and was transferred to Windsor, where they were just starting to build Canadian military pattern vehicles mixed up with civilian vehicles. And it was a very interesting experience because these vehicles were being forced into production with blueprints that were very dry. And my job was to find out where the main problems were, get back to Sid Swallow's staff, and if it required an engineering change, get the engineering change made within the hour, in fact, get the part changed, get the damn thing built. Because they were almost prototypes being built over the main lines, because at this particular time, the car companies, and we're speaking now of Ford as the example, had orders from Doug James to build and ship in a hell of a hurry. The Canadian forces were in Great Britain. It was prior to Dunkirk, so they were a good possibility at that time of the Canadian forces joining the British forces in Europe. And they needed vehicles in the worst possible way. And it was just amazing what you can do if you have to. And particularly with the customer, the only customer that we had, which was Doug James' crew, saying, we gotta have them, here's the sailing date of the boats, catch them on it. I can remember one specific example that lived to haunt me. My boss said, look, we've got 112 6x4 chassis and cab that have got to be shipped and hit a shipping date to go on a certain boat. I can't remember now, of course. But it was early in February of 1940. And these were units built off a line, then knocked down sufficiently to put into 2-unit packs. There's 2 chassis, one on top of the other, and a pack with the cabs in them, and shipped that way. Well, I learned very quickly how you can beat a government inspector. We had to get them shipped, and we couldn't ship them if the government inspector kept knocking them down. Well, they knock them down for things like rivets that weren't quite as pretty as they might be, but would work all right as far as I was concerned. So my job was to get these things out of the place, which we did. The interesting and probably more amusing part of the story was, it comes along April, and my boss said to me, we got a problem in England trying to assemble vehicles. Would you like to go over for a few months and help them? Well, this was the same trip that Sid was going on, so I very kindly went along on his honeymoon with him, and we went off to New York, and arrived in England. And my first job, believe it or not, was to reassemble this 112 6x4 bloody trucks. Well, I sure cursed the guy to put them together. Shorted. We had the damn things in the Citroen car plant, and they'd never seen a truck in their lives before, under a contract to assemble them for us. And of course, all American threads or SAE specifications or whatever, so mixed up with metric, and I can't remember anymore. As it turned out on this assembly business, shortly after I arrived in the UK, we had the Canadian forces who were operating a very nice assembly plant at Southampton, right on the docks.
Let's see the gun.
The local cars. And we lost it. Don't remember the date you said?
November 30th.
November, was it? Oh, we were out for a few months. And from then on, we assembled cars and trucks and motorcycles and jeeps and what have you, under contract in some 30 or 40 different locations across the UK and in fact including Scotland, which gave us a lot more security, and we stopped shipping them in completely knocked down condition, because of the shipping in knockdown condition. We would find we would lose ships and we'd lose engines, but we'd get the chassis, and that created some serious problems. So we went back to shipping only in a SKD or semi-knockdown condition, and assembled these in many locations. That is the vehicles that were destined for the Canadian forces. As Bill has mentioned, we got involved very, very much later not later, in about 1942, in assisting the British in specifying vehicles for production in Canada for their own account. Early in the war, the British War Office told the Canadians that they really didn't need any assistance in the way of production, but as the war ran on, they certainly did, and I think the Canadian military pattern vehicles, B vehicles, and armored vehicles, made a most important contribution to the British forces.
Bill, could I make one comment on something that Herb said? That the British weren't very enthusiastic about what Canadians did back in 1940, 41. They really didn't give a damn whether we made vehicles or whether we didn't, and they wouldn't give us any help, and they insisted that 13 inches of Sid mentioned be there. Colonel Carr, later Brigadier Carr, was one of the finest gentlemen any of us ever knew. The only time I ever saw him become agitated and red in the face was at a meeting the two of us had with the MGO in England in January 1941. When we were trying to standardize vehicles, and we got down to a point where I think everything was standardized except the toolkits. Of course, the British took their 1500 weights as 4x2, we had 4x4, but other than that, they had 2 screwdrivers and we had 1, and we tried to standardize them. The MGO said, look, we're not really interested in that. He said, sure, we lost some vehicles at Dunkirk, but the British industry is coming back, and we'll soon be able to supply all our requirements, and we don't care what the Canadians want to do. When the present orders we've got placed in Canada, mind you, this is January 1941, when the present orders run out, we won't be buying anything more from Canada. And Brigadier Carr, he was colonel at the time, absolutely turned almost purple. He was so... he'd worked for years and years and years to develop this with the British, and this is the reply that he got. And this carried, lots of people will vouch for the indifference of the British. We were still a colony, I can assure you that. On the other hand, the Americans were much, much nicer to us. General Christmas in Washington just opened the doors and said, how many 10-ton transporters do you want? Canada wants them, they can have them. And how many Jeeps do you want? You can have them. And he knew that we were a small country relatively, and that what he gave us wasn't going to hurt the war effort. And the Americans were just so much better in cooperating with us than the British were. The British had another, I thought, little underhanded trick. They put in excess profit taxes in England so that these fellows who were doing the assembly couldn't make an excess profit. And I think they were the last year before the war to what they could make. So they set, for accounting purposes, they set fixed prices for assembling vehicles. So they want 100 pounds for assembling a vehicle. The British would pay 100 pounds, we'd pay 100 pounds. But the British Treasury, on an audit, got back everything that, out of the 100 pounds that was in excess of what they should make. Did they give anything to Canada? No, sir, we got nothing on it.